Okay, welcome back. This is the video for day 7 to 13, video number 02. So we're officially 02, not 01A or 01B. We're in video 2 now of our chronological Bible study. So we have a lot to cover today, so I'm excited. I hope you are too. Let's dig in. First week we covered 2,000 years of history. This week we've slowed it down and we've narrowed our focus into more detail. So the first week we were covering a broad section of history. We kind of just hit the high points. We're really getting into the details this week. So the high points of our genealogy that we're tracing, right? We start with Adam and Eve, then we went to Seth, and then we followed Seth on through. Eventually we got to Noah, which is over here. Here's Noah. And remember Noah, further on in his life, we had the flood, symbolized by this paperclip. Noah had his 3 sons, Japheth, Shem, and Ham. Those 3 tribes split up at Babel and spread across the earth. And eventually, this week we've narrowed our focus from all those tribes just to the tribe of Shem. And we've further narrowed it down to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this is where we end this week's reading at, is with the introduction of the 12 tribes of Jacob. Next week they're going to be going into Egypt, and where they will be there for 400 years. At that point, after we read the book of Job, we're going to get into the book of Exodus and them coming out of Egypt. But before we get into the 12 sons of Jacob and where we're at this week, we're going to back up a little bit to the end of last week. And the reason why is we skipped over something that was pretty significant. Let's back up to 1914 BC, page 25 in your chronological Bible, Genesis chapter 16. Abram, there's not Abraham yet, Abram lies with Sarai's Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. Verse 1, chapter 16. Sarai, who is not Sarah yet, Sarai, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "The Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her." All right, and you'll see this happen again. So Abram had sexual relations with Hagar. She became pregnant, and when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress, Sarai, with contempt. Then Sarai said to Abram, "This is all your fault," although it was her idea. "I put my servant into your arms, but now she's pregnant and she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show who's wrong, you or me." So Sarai gets all upset now that Hagar's actually pregnant, which was Sarai's intent the whole time, and she's upset. Verse 6, Abram replied, "Look, she's your servant, so deal with her as you see fit." Then Sarai treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. This is where it gets interesting. So verse 7, the angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a spring of water in the wilderness, along the road to Shur. The angel said to her, "Hagar, Sarai's servant, where have you come from and where are you going?" Hagar said, "I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai," she replied. The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her authority." Then he added, "I will give you more descendants than you can count." That's going to come into play here in a minute. In verse 11, the angel also said, "You are now pregnant and will give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael," which means God hears. "For the Lord has heard your cry of distress. The son of yours will be a wild man, untamed as a wild donkey. He will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone will be against him. Yes, he will live in open hostility against all his relatives." So thereafter, Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord who had spoken to her. She said, "You're the God who sees me." So Hagar gave Abram a son, and Abram named him Ishmael. So in between that point and the point we're about to go to, Abram, his name's changed to Abraham, and the Lord makes a covenant with him, with the sign of the covenant, the circumcision. All right, now we're going to fast forward over to page 30 with Genesis 21. Go to verse 8. When Isaac grew up and was about to be weaned, Abraham prepared, who is now Abraham prepared a huge feast to celebrate the occasion. But Sarah saw Ishmael, the son of Abraham, and her Egyptian servant Hagar making fun of her son Isaac. So she turned to Abraham and demanded, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son." he is not going to share the inheritance with my son Isaac. I won't have it. So this upset Abraham very much because Ishmael was his son. And God told Abraham, do not be upset over the boy and your servant. Do whatever Sarah tells you, for Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. But I will also make a nation of the descendants of Hagar's son because he is your son too. So now you have, remember pretty much the theme for last week was people took things into their own hands. They did things by their own thinking, doing things their own way, and it led to destruction, and God has to correct them. And because of that, Sarai gave Hagar to Abram as his wife, and then Ishmael was created. So Abraham got up early the next morning, prepared food and container of water, strapped them on Hagar's shoulders. Then he sent her away with her son, and she wandered aimlessly in the wilderness. When her water was gone, she put the boy in the shade of a bush. Then she went and sat down by herself about 100 yards away. I don't want to watch the boy die, she said, as she burst into tears. But God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, Hagar, what's wrong? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies here. Go to him and comfort him, for I will make a great nation of his descendants. This is an important point to note that still today, many Middle Eastern people still claim their lineage to Ishmael. And also, most Arabic men still adhere to the practice of circumcision. Remember, Ishmael was born, and he was a young man, a teenager, and then God made the covenant with Abraham, said that this will be the sign of the covenant to all your descendants, which Ishmael was one of, and Ishmael was circumcised. And still today, not only Jews, but also people that claim that they're descendants of Ishmael are circumcised as well. But remember, Abraham's covenant will be passed through Isaac. Because back in Genesis 17, verses 15 through 21, God said to Abraham, regarding Sarai, your wife, her name will no longer be Sarai. From now on, her name will be Sarah, and I will bless her and give you a son from her. Yes, I will bless her richly, and she will become the mother of many nations. Kings and nations will be among her descendants. We read this last week. Verse 18, so Abraham said to God, may Ishmael live under your special blessing? Verse 19, but God replied, no, Sarah your wife will give birth to a son for you. You will name him Isaac, and I will confirm my covenant with him and his descendants as an everlasting covenant. Verse 20, as for Ishmael, I will bless him also, just as you have asked. I will make him extremely fruitful and multiply his descendants. He will become the father of 12 princes. Now this is interesting. I will make him a great nation, but my covenant will be confirmed with Isaac. So there's 12 princes going to come from Ishmael, and then Ishmael's nephew, we find out later on, Jacob. From Jacob, there also comes 12 tribes that come out of that, and that's why we know the 12 tribes of Israel. So the 12 princes of the 12 tribes of the 12 princes of Ishmael, they go out and they fill up the modern day Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and even as far as Iran, and they become a nomadic people living out in that space out there. Interestingly enough, Muhammad, he traced his lineage to Kedar, which was one of those original sons of Ishmael. So you see how all this is kind of coming to play. Don't forget that the Quran wasn't written until 632 AD. So we're talking about 600 years after Jesus' death. So don't let that confuse you. But it is interesting that the founder of Islam does trace his lineage back to one of the sons of Ishmael. So Ishmael has 12 sons. His nephew Jacob has 12 sons. God confirms the Abrahamic covenant through Isaac and his son, who is Jacob. And then Jacob has 12 sons. So during the creation and the patriarch period, if you pay attention, you'll notice several instances where the older son is passed up for the younger. For example, Cain and Abel. Cain was the older son, Abel was the younger son. He killed Abel, but then there was still another son that was born who was Seth. Cain was cursed and cast out, and the lineage passed through Seth, who was the younger. Now we have Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael was the older son. and now the Abrahamic covenant is confirmed through Isaac, the younger son. In the future, we'll see that Isaac has two sons, Esau and Jacob, Esau being the oldest, and Jacob being the younger. The covenant's passed through Jacob, not through Esau. Jacob is the younger. Later on, Joseph is going to have two sons, and the same thing is going to happen to him. There's going to be an older son named Manasseh and a younger son named Ephraim, and when it comes down to Jacob blessing the two sons, Jacob blesses the younger rather than the older. This is less a sign of favoritism and more of a sign of God's providence and foreknowledge. So God knows the people that must be born to accomplish His task on earth. He knew what kind of person you needed to be before you were born. God knew the person you needed to be to accomplish your task here on earth. You're not designed by chance like science would tell you. You were designed in the mind of God before your grandparents were even born. But going back to day 7 in Genesis chapter 22, verse 1. So sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. Abraham, God called. Yes, he replied, here I am. Take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much. Remember, Ishmael now has been sent out in the desert with his mother Hagar. The angel has spoken to Hagar, let him know everything's going to be okay, and that Ishmael is going to become a great nation. So, verse 2, take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Now, remember last week at the end of the video I talked about Moriah, Mount Moriah being the Temple Mount, where the temple used to be. The Romans destroyed the second temple that was built there, destroyed it in 70 AD. Today, the Dome of the Rock is there. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you. The next morning, Abraham got up early. He saddled his donkey and took 2 of his servants with him, along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood for a fire for a burnt offering and set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day of their journey, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Stay here with the donkey, Abraham told the servants. The boy and I will travel a little further. We will worship there, then we will come right back. Verse 6, so Abraham placed the wood on the burnt offering of Isaac's shoulders, and while he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them walked on together, Isaac turned to Abraham and said, Father. So this is Abraham's son. It's like your son turning to you and saying, Father. Yes, my son, Abraham replied. We have the fire and the wood. The boy said, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son, Abraham answered. And they both walked on together. We talk about Abraham's faith being tested. Abraham has faith the entire time. Verse 9. When they arrived at the place where God had told him to go, Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood on it. Then he tied his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. This is where it gets hairy, y'all. If I was Isaac, I would be like, what are you doing? What are you doing, Dad? About Abraham being faithful, he continues on. Verse 10. Abraham picked up the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven. Abraham, Abraham. Yes, Abraham replied. Here I am. He must have been like, oh, thank God. Yes, yes. The angel says, don't lay a hand on the boy. Do not hurt him in any way, for now I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me even your son, your only son. Remember, God had already told Abraham that he was going to confirm his covenant through Isaac. And he had already sent Ishmael away, so it had to go through Isaac. He didn't understand what God was doing. He still obeyed. He still had faith, and he still continued on. Then Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. So he took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering in place of his son. Verse 15, then the angel of the Lord called again to Abraham from heaven. This is what the Lord says, because you have obeyed me and have not withheld even your son, your only son, I swear by my own name that I will certainly bless you. I will multiply your descendants beyond number, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will conquer the cities of their enemies, and through your descendants all the nations of the earth will be blessed, all because you have obeyed me. Then they returned to the servants and traveled back to Beersheba, where Abraham continued to live. We've gone through this whole trial. Abraham knew in the back of his mind this whole time that that covenant was going to be confirmed through Isaac. So he was trusting God was going to honor his covenant. That is why when they go up to the mountain, he tells the servants, me and the boy are going to go up there, and then we're going to come back. Abraham knew in the back of his mind that God was going to honor his covenant, but he was willing to do whatever it was that God asked him to do. In the same way today, we know that he loves us. We know that he cares for us, even when we don't think that he cares for us, even when we deny him, even when we go against everything that he commands us to do. He still loves us. Let us have the faith that Abraham had, willing to go the distance and do whatever he asks us to do. Learn from Abraham. All right, so long story short, Isaac grows up, marries Rebekah. This is day 8 reading Genesis chapter 25. Ishmael goes on and has all those descendants there in verses 12 through 18. Then we get to the story of Jacob and Esau. These are those two descendants of Isaac that we're going to concentrate on. About 1840 BC. Chapter 25, starting at verse 19. This is the account of the family of Isaac, the son of Abraham. So we've got Abraham, Isaac, now these two. When Isaac was 40 years old, he married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean, from Paddan Aram, and the sister of Laban, the Aramean. Verse 21, Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was unable to have children. The Lord answered Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant with twins. But the two children struggled with each other in her womb. So she went to ask the Lord about it. Why is this happening to me? She asked. The Lord told her, the sons in your womb will become two nations. From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son. Okay, so here we have. Remember I told you there was instances throughout creation era and the patriarch era where this occurs, where the older is passed over for the younger. Verse 24, and when the time came to give birth, Rebekah discovered that she did indeed have twins. The first one was very red at birth and covered with thick hair like a fur coat. So they named him Esau. Then the other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. So they're twins. Esau was born first. He's got red hair. Esau means hair. And then the descendants of Esau will become Edom, or the Edomites. And the Edom means red. And then Jacob means supplanter or deceiver. So we'll see how these names play out here in a few minutes. Interesting note, Genesis 25, this is on page 35 of your Bible. Genesis 25, verse 9. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite. So Ishmael came back as a grown man, having already had probably his 12 sons, have come back and with his brother Isaac, and they both bury their father together. So Esau sells his birthright very haphazardly. As the oldest son, he sells it for some stew to his younger brother Jacob. Then some time goes past. Genesis chapter 26, verse 23. So from there Isaac moved to Beersheba, where the Lord appeared to him on the night of his arrival. I am the God of your father, Abraham, he said. Do not be afraid, for I am with you and will bless you. I will multiply your descendants, and they will become a great nation. I will do this because of my promise to Abraham, my servant. Then Isaac built an altar there and worshiped the Lord. So you see how the covenant was confirmed with Abraham. He said the covenant will pass through Isaac, and here the Lord appears to Isaac and confirms that covenant with Isaac. And we're going to see it happen again with Isaac's son Jacob. So this covenant is going to keep passing through all the way down to Jacob, at which Jacob has those 12 sons. Genesis chapter 27, this is on page 37 of your Bible. One day when Isaac was old, so the father Isaac now, so there's Abraham, Isaac. Isaac, when he was old and turning blind, he called for Esau, his older son, so the older twin, the red one, and said, my son. Yes, father, Esau replied. I'm an old man now, Isaac said, and I don't know when I may die. Take your bow and quiver full of arrows and go out into the open country to hunt some wild game for me, because Esau was a great hunter. And his father loved all the game that he would bring back, all the food that was prepared from that game. Prepare my favorite dish, and I will bring it here for me to eat. Then I will pronounce the blessing that belongs to you, my firstborn son, before I die. But Rebekah, his wife, overheard what Isaac had said to his son Esau. So when Esau left to hunt for the wild game, verse 6, she said to her son Jacob, Listen, I overheard your father say to Esau, Bring me some wild game and prepare me a delicious meal. Then I will bless you in the Lord's presence before I die. Now my son, listen to me. Do exactly as I tell you. Go out to the flocks and bring me 2 fine young goats. I'll use them to prepare your father's favorite dish. Then take the food to your father so he can eat it and bless you before he dies. So Rebekah here is playing favorites. She favors the younger son over the older. And Rebekah is actually going against what Isaac's wishes are. Isaac wants to, as tradition, as is the way of their culture, Isaac is meaning to bless the older over the younger. This is verse 11. But look, Jacob replied to Rebekah, My brother Esau is a hairy man, and my skin is smooth. What if my father touches me? He'll see that I'm trying to trick him. Then he'll curse me instead of blessing me. But his mother replied, Then let the curse fall on me, my son. Just do what I tell you. Go out and get the goats for me. Now, parents, you older parents that have grown children, you'll probably know that playing favorites with your kids never turns out good. Never turns out good. You always have one that resents the other. And you'll see this play out here in this story, because Esau will definitely resent Jacob for what he's about to do here. They've already been doing this. Isaac favors Esau, and the mother favors the younger twin, Jacob. Verse 14, So Jacob went out and got the young goats for his mother. Rebekah took them and prepared a delicious meal, just the way Isaac liked it. Then she took Esau's favorite clothes, which were there in the house, and gave them to her younger son, Jacob. She covered his arms and the smooth part of his neck with the skin of the young goats. Then she gave Jacob the delicious meal, including freshly baked bread. So Jacob took the food to his father. My father, he said. Yes, my son, Isaac answered. Who are you, Esau or Jacob? Jacob replied, It's Esau, your firstborn son. I've done as you've told me. Here is the wild game. Now sit up and eat it so you can give me your blessing. And so he does. He deceives. He ends up deceiving his father. Isaac unknowingly blesses Jacob after Jacob has already stolen Esau's birthright. And now Jacob gets away with taking the blessing that should have gone to Esau. Now imagine if you're raised up with a brother whose parents play favorites. This is going to cause a huge problem between the two brothers. Esau finds out about it when he actually brings the meal that Isaac actually asked for. Isaac says, I've already given my blessing and I was deceived. And then we're going to go to Genesis chapter 27, verse 41. From that time on, Esau hated Jacob because their father had given Jacob the blessing. And Esau began to scheme. I will soon be mourning my father's death. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. So because of that, Rebekah sends Jacob away. Esau stays there and marries into some of Ishmael's family, some of Ishmael's daughters. While he's away, Jacob has a dream. All right, this is chapter 28, verse 10. Meanwhile, Jacob left Beersheba and traveled toward Haran. Remember, Haran was up north, so they were down in the land of Canaan. He's moving up north, up here at the top of the Fertile Crescent. At sundown, he arrived at a good place to set up camp and stopped there for the night. Jacob found a stone to rest his head against and lay down to sleep. As he slept, he dreamed of a stairway that reached from earth up to heaven. Then he saw the angels of God going up and down the stairway. At the top of the stairway stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of your father Isaac. The ground you are laying on belongs to you. I am giving it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. So he left. He has actually arrived at Haran yet. So here we are. This is Jacob. He made the covenant with Abraham. He confirmed the covenant with Isaac. And now he's confirming the covenant with Jacob. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. They will spread out in all directions, to the west and the east, the north and the south, and all the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. That's a key verse right there. So how on earth would all the families of the earth be blessed through one guy? Well, that's because eventually we know Jesus descends from Jacob. And through Jesus, we're all saved. What's more, is verse 15. What's more, I am with you, and I will protect you wherever you go. One day I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have finished giving you everything I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place. I wasn't even aware of it. But he was also afraid and said, what an awesome place this is. It is none other than the house of God, the very gateway to heaven. Verse 22, Jacob sets up a pillar there and said, this memorial pillar I have set up will become a place for worshiping God, and I will present to God a tenth of everything he gives me. There's that tenth again. Okay, remember we talked about it with Melchizedek way back when. Now we see it again, there's a tenth. So there, he's giving his tithe. All right, so fast forward. Jacob goes to his uncle's house, his uncle Laban. He falls in love with Rachel. His uncle deceives him and gives his older daughter to him first. Then he convinces him to work another 7 years for Rachel. And then Jacob doesn't have anything of his own, but now he's starting to have children. And now he has to work another 6 years. So for a total of 20 years, he works for his uncle and finally heads back. Well, by the time he's heading back, he's worked 7 years for Leah, 7 years for Rachel, 6 years for his flock. And he's got his first wife, his second wife, and they also have 2 maidservants, Zilpah and Bilhah. This is where we get the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, so we're going to go through Genesis, page 40, chapter 29, through, it's the next chapter also. So we're going to read this and so that we can kind of map out how all of this plays out. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, because remember, he didn't really want Leah as a wife, he wanted Rachel. So when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he enabled her to have children. But Rachel could not conceive. So Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben. So there's number 1, Reuben, right there. For she said, the Lord will notice my misery, and now my husband will love me. She soon became pregnant again and gave birth to another son. She named him Simeon. So there's number 2, Simeon. For she said, the Lord heard that I was unloved and has given me another son. Then she became pregnant a 3rd time and gave birth to another son. His name was Levi. Remember Simeon and Levi. We're going to pick up with these guys in a minute. So 1, 2, 3 sons he has so far. All from Leah, not from Rachel. Surely this time my husband will feel affection for me, since I have given him 3 sons. Once again, Leah became pregnant and gave birth to another son. She named him Judah. Judah is very important. Okay, Judah is a very important tribe, and we'll tell you why in just a minute. So now he has 4 sons, all from Leah, none from Rachel. When Rachel saw that she wasn't having any children for Jacob, she became jealous of her sister. She pleaded with Jacob, give me children or I'll die. Then Jacob became furious with Rachel. Am I God? He asked. He's the one who has kept you from having children. So he's like, it's not my fault. God's the one keeping you from having children. Verse 3. Then Rachel told him, take my maid Bilhah. So there's Rachel, there's her maid Bilhah, and sleep with her. She will bear children for me, and through her I can have a family too. So Bilhah is acting as a surrogate mother for Rachel, basically. Rachel gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob as a wife, and he slept with her, and Bilhah became pregnant and presented him with a son. Rachel named him Dan. So there's number 5, Dan. For she said, God has vindicated me. He has heard my request and given me a son. Then Bilhah became pregnant again and gave Jacob a second son. Rachel named him Naphtali. So there's number 6. For she said, I have struggled hard with my sister, and I am winning. Verse 9. So Rachel now, she's saying that she's winning against her sister. Her sister actually had these children, these 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bilhah as these two, and Rachel saying, now I'm winning the fight against my sister through Bilhah. Meanwhile, Leah realized she wasn't getting pregnant anymore, so she took her servant Zilpah, right here, and gave her to Jacob as a wife. And soon Zilpah presented him with a son. Leah named him Gad, right there, for she said, how fortunate I am. Then Zilpah gave Jacob a second son, and Leah named him Asher, right there, number 8. For she said, what joy is mine. Now the other women will celebrate with me. So now there's this whole competition between the two wives. This is why this is not a natural thing. Remember, in the Garden of Eden, there was Adam and Eve. If God had wanted men to have multiple wives, he would have created more than one woman. He created one woman, Eve, because it's supposed to be one man and one woman. Here you see this whole competition going on. You can see it's not healthy. Once again, you can see that theme that when we take things into our own hands, we muddy the water. But God can still use it for his purposes. And that's exactly what happens, because there ends up being 12 sons. Verse 14, chapter 29. One day during the wheat harvest, Reuben, right here, the oldest, found some mandrakes growing in a field and brought them to his mother, Leah. Rachel, right here, Rachel begged Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But Leah angrily replied, wasn't it enough that you stole my husband? Now will you steal my son's mandrakes too? Because remember, Jacob had married Leah first. And there's this whole jealousy thing going on between them. Rachel answered, I will let Jacob sleep with you tonight if you give me some of the mandrakes. So that evening, as Jacob was coming home from the fields, Leah went out to meet him. You must come and sleep with me tonight, she said. I have paid for you with some mandrakes that my son found. Well, it's getting serious. They're like paying to sleep with their husband now. This is not a good situation. So that night, he slept with Leah, and God answered Leah's prayers. She became pregnant again and gave birth to a 5th son for Jacob. Okay, and it's not counting, the reason why it says the 5th is it's not counting Gad, Asher, Dan, or Naphtali. These two from Rachel aren't born yet. So really it's just counting these here. This is a 5th son from Leah. So gave birth to a 5th son from Leah. She named him Issachar, for she said, God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband as a wife. Then Leah became pregnant again, gave birth to a 6th son from Jacob. So this number 10 on here is actually the 10th son, but this is saying the 6th son, and she named him Zebulun. So there's number 10, or number 6 as is here, because it's the 6th son of Leah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Later she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Now don't forget about Dinah. She isn't numbered as one of the sons, of course, because she's a daughter, but don't forget about Dinah. She's listed here for a purpose. Then God remembered Rachel's plight and answered her prayers by enabling her to have children. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. God has removed my disgrace, she said, and she named him Joseph. For she said, may the Lord add yet another son to my family. So notice there's 12 sons, but there's only been 11 born so far. Joseph being the youngest, number 11, right there. At this point, this is Rachel's only son. We're on page 42, Genesis chapter 31. Jacob soon learned that Laban's sons were grumbling about him. So his uncle Laban's kids were grumbling about Jacob because his flock is bigger than Laban's is, and he's got this wealth, and he's got all these children that's been born. In verse 3, the Lord said to Jacob, return to your land of your father and grandfather, and to your relatives there, and I will be with you. Now remember, when he left, when he was on his way to Haran, and he slept there and had the dream, saw the whole Jacob's ladder, stairway to heaven, whatever you want to call it. God told him that he would return to this land one day. He would bring them back there. Well, now it's happening. Okay, we're about 1743 BC. Jacob called Rachel and Leah out to the field where he was watching his flock, and he said to them, I have noticed that your father's attitude toward me has changed. The God of my father has been with me. You know how hard I have worked for your father, but he has cheated me, changed my wages 10 times, but God has not allowed him to do me any harm. For if he said, the speckled animals will be your wages, the whole flock began to produce speckled young. Remember, that's how they separated their 2 flocks. Jacob took the speckled ones, the black ones, the striped ones, and then Laban was left for the others. And there's a whole thing. He put like sticks in the water trough and had them mate in a certain place and all that. So Jacob kind of brought that about also, where his flock would grow to be larger than Laban's. Jacob packs up everybody like the Beverly Hillbillies and they leave. And Laban pursues them, and then they have to make a treaty. The one bad thing about going home is that he has to make amends with Esau. There's going to be a reckoning between these two twin brothers. Now remember how wrongly Jacob had treated his brother Esau. First, he knew this was a bad trade, and he took his brother's birthright as the older son. And then two, he went in and took his father's blessing as well. Remember, their father has died. They're both grown men. They both have wives and children. They've both grown into big nations by this point. It's about 1743 BC. This is Genesis chapter 32. Jacob started on his way again. Angels of God came to meet him. When Jacob saw them, he exclaimed, "This is God's camp." So he named the place Mahanaim. Then Jacob sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau, who was living in the region of Seir in the land of Edom. And he told them, "Give this message to my master Esau. Humble greetings from your servant Jacob. Till now I have been living with Uncle Laban, and now I own cattle, donkeys, flocks of sheep and goats, and many servants, both men and women. I have sent these messages to inform my Lord of my coming, hoping that you will be friendly to me." Remember, before Jacob left, Esau wanted to kill him. He has to come back into this region. He knows Esau is there. He knows Esau's probably has a great wealth and all that as well. So what he does, he separates his family into sections. He separates his household goods into sections, thinking that as he comes in there, if Esau is really going to attack, he's going to attack those front sections first, and then they'll have enough time to turn around and get out of there, if that, or divert them, go around them, or whatever. These different processions are moving forward. Verse 13, Jacob stayed where he was for the night. Then he selected these gifts from his possessions to present to his brother Esau: 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 20 ewes, 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. He divided these animals into herds and assigned each to different servants. Then he told his servants, "Go ahead of me with the animals, but keep some distance between the herds." He gave these instructions to the men leading the first group: "When my brother Esau meets you, he will ask, 'Whose servants are you? Where are you going? Who owns these animals?' You must reply, 'They belong to your servant Jacob.'" Your servant Jacob. He's coming back very humbly. "But they are a gift for his master Esau. Look, he is coming right behind us." So Jacob gave the same instructions to the second and third herdsmen and to all who follow behind the herds. You must say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and be sure to say, "Look, your servant Jacob is right behind us." So he's sending gifts. He's doing everything he can because the Lord's commanded him to go back, and he's obeying, but he's trying to be as cautious as he can because he knows Esau has, and rightfully so, has this issue with Jacob. During the night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 servant wives, and his 11 sons, and crossed the Jabbok River. So he took his 2 wives, his 2 servant wives, and his 11 sons. Remember, there's not 12 at this point, 11 sons, and they crossed the Jabbok River. After taking them to the other side, he sent over all his possessions. This left Jacob all alone in the camp. And a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of his socket. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. He replied, "Jacob." "Your name will no longer be Jacob," the man told him. "From now on you will be called Israel." This is where the name Israel comes from. It comes from Jacob's renaming. Now remember, Abram had been renamed Abraham. And now Jacob is being renamed Israel. "Because you have fought with God and with men and have won." "Please tell me your name," Jacob said. "Why do you want to know my name?" the man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God. For he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared." So just like the Lord appeared to his grandfather Abraham and sat down and ate with him before the 2 angels went into Sodom to meet Lot and thereafter destroy the city. In that same way, now the Lord has come down to test Jacob in this way. So in Genesis 32, Jacob has this wrestling match And after that, God gives him the name Israel. Interestingly enough, Israel means God fights. Jacob goes from being a scheming supplanter, stealing his brother's birthright, to becoming a man who God fights through, named Israel. And Jacob and Esau, they make amends. The process is Jacob obeys God and does what he's told. And even though it doesn't make sense, he knows Esau wants to kill him. He continues on, just like Abraham did. It didn't make sense to him why Isaac was his only son, but he was being told to go and sacrifice him. But he continued on anyway. Now Jacob is doing the same thing. And because of that, what he didn't know was that Esau's heart had changed. And Esau shows grace. Jacob obeys. And they make amends through that process. And God's purpose is still carried forward. And that covenant is confirmed through Isaac and then Jacob. So let's go to chapter 34, verses 1 through 31. One day, Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah, remember Jacob, Leah, Dinah, the daughter, went to visit some of the young women who lived in the area. But when the local prince Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, saw Dinah, he seized her and raped her. So this is a prince that raped Dinah. But then he fell in love with her, and he tried to win her affection with tender words. He said to his father Hamor, "Get me this young girl. I want to marry her." Soon Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter Dinah. But since his sons were out in the fields herding his livestock, he said nothing until they returned. Hamor, Shechem's father, came to discuss the matter with Jacob. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons had come in from the field, and as soon as they heard what had happened, they were shocked and furious, deservedly so, that their sister had been raped. Shechem had done a disgraceful thing against Jacob's family, something that should never be done. Verse 8, Hamor tried to speak with Jacob and his sons. The king is talking to Jacob and his sons. He says, "My son Shechem is truly in love with your daughter." He said, "Please let him marry her. In fact, let's arrange other marriages too. We give us your daughters for your sons, for our sons, and we give you our daughters for your sons. And you may live among us. The land is open to you. Settle here and trade with us, and feel free to buy property in the area." Then Shechem himself spoke to Dinah's father and brothers, "Please be kind to me and let me marry her." Just the prince telling them, he begged, "I will give you whatever you ask for. No matter what dowry or gift you demand, I will gladly pay it. Just give me the girl as my wife." Verse 13, But since Shechem had defiled their sister, Dinah, Jacob's sons responded deceitfully to Shechem and his father Hamor. They said to them, "We couldn't possibly allow this because you're not circumcised." So they're playing a trick on them. They're playing a trick on the house of Hamor here. "It would be a disgrace for our sister to marry a man like you, but there is a solution. If every man among you will be circumcised like we are, then we will give you our daughters, and we'll take our daughters, take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live among you and become one people. But if you don't agree to be circumcised, we will take her and we'll be on our way." So what they're doing is they're telling them, "We'll agree to the terms of this proposal, but all of you have to be circumcised because everybody in the house of Abraham has to be circumcised." And they're making a false premise there that they can only associate with them if they're indeed circumcised too. In verse 18, Hamor and his son Shechem agreed to their proposal. Verse 19, Shechem wasted no time in acting on this request, for he wanted Jacob's daughter desperately. Shechem was a highly respected member of his family, and he went with his father Hamor to present this proposal to the leaders of the town gate. "These men are our friends," they said. "Let's invite them to live here among us and trade freely. Look, the land is large enough to hold them. We can take their daughters as wives and let them marry ours, but they will consider staying here and becoming one people with us only if all of our men are circumcised, just as they are. But if we do this, all their livestock and possessions will eventually be ours. Come, let's agree to their terms and let them settle here among us." It was a win-win for Hamor and Shechem and their people. So it was easy to convince them, like, look, let's agree to this. The business transaction that would take place, it was going to be advantageous to the house of Hamor. So all the men in the town council agreed with Hamor and Shechem, and every male in the town was circumcised. But 3 days later, when their wounds were still sore, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi. Remember those two sons, Simeon and Levi, who were Dinah's full brothers. So we have Dinah, Simeon, and Levi, brother number 2, brother number 3. Okay, so full brother from Leah. Okay, they took their swords and entered the town without opposition, because all the men of the town were still under the weather from being circumcised 3 days earlier. Then they slaughtered every male there, including Hamor and his son Shechem. They killed them with their swords, and they took Dinah from Shechem's house and returned to their camp. Meanwhile, the rest of Jacob's sons arrived, finding the men slaughtered. They plundered the town because their sister had been defiled there. They seized all the flocks and herds and donkeys and everything they could lay their hands on, both inside the town and outside the fields. They looted all their wealth and plundered their houses. They also took all their little children and wives and led them away as captives. Afterward, Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, pay attention, you have ruined me. You made me stink among all the people of this land, among all the Canaanites and Perizzites. We are so few that they will join forces and crush us. I will be ruined, and my entire household will be wiped out. But why should we let him treat our sister like a prostitute? They retorted angrily. To Levi and Simeon, the other brothers, this seemed like a virtuous act. We tricked them, we got them back. Jacob is mad at them for it. And they're having a hard time understanding why. Well, remember this, that Simeon and Levi, when they finally enter the promised land many years later, the tribe of Levi, the descendants of Levi, won't actually possess any land. They'll live amongst all the rest of the tribe. The tribe of Simeon only gets a teeny tiny little piece of land on the south part of Judah. In Genesis chapter 35, God said to Jacob, get ready, move to Bethel and settle there. Build an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. So Jacob told everyone in his household, get rid of all your pagan idols, purify yourselves, and put on clean clothing. We are now going to Bethel, where I will build an altar to the God who answered my prayers when I was in distress. He has been with me wherever I have gone. And God appeared to him again at Bethel. God blessed him, saying, your name is Jacob, but you will not be called Jacob any longer. From now on your name will be Israel. So God renamed him Israel. Be fruitful, multiply, you will become a great nation. Kings will be among your descendants, and I will give you the land I once gave to Abraham and Isaac. Yes, I will give it to you and your descendants after you. Then God went up from the place where he had spoken to Jacob. So then that covenant that was made with Abraham was confirmed with Isaac, and now it's confirmed with Jacob. Chapter 35, starting 16. Leaving Bethel, Jacob and his clan moved on toward Ephrath, but Rachel went into labor. Remember, this was his most beloved wife. This is the first one that he wanted to marry. One he worked 14 years, because remember, he worked the first 7 years, then his uncle tricked him into marrying his older daughter, and then this is the daughter he originally fell in love with, Rachel, and it's given him one son so far. And so far she's just had the one son, Joseph. But Rachel went into labor while they were still some distance away, so they were still traveling, and they were in between 2 points. Her labor pains were intense, and after a very hard delivery, the midwife finally exclaimed, don't be afraid, you have another son. Rachel was about to die, but with her last breath she named the baby Ben-Oni, which means son of my sorrow. The baby's father, however, Jacob, called him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Ephrath is another name for Bethlehem. From the 12 tribes of Israel is now complete, and his most beloved wife, Rachel, has just died, giving birth to the last son, the 12th son, whose name is Benjamin. That's important to remember as we move into the next phase of our story here. Kind of focus in on Joseph and what's going on with him. But there's a whole plan in work here. Remember, way back when God told Abraham, you're gonna go into a foreign land. Your descendants will be slaves for 400 years, and then they're gonna come back to here. And that's all going to play into that. Benjamin, Joseph, and the 12 sons. And that's what we're going to read about next week. Okay, then we move on to January 13th, or day 13 of our reading. You see, we go back to some genealogy here. We go to the descendants of Esau. It tells us who the peoples of Edom are, which was the place where Esau settled. And then eventually those people will be called Edomites. Genesis chapter 36, if you look over verse 12, when it's naming all the descendants of Esau, there it says, Timnah, the concubine of Esau's son Eliphaz, gave birth to a son named Amalek. That's important to remember, and you'll notice if you pay attention to the root names of all these people, the tribes were named after whoever the tribes began with. Jacob, now that his name is changed to Israel, all those descendants of Israel are now called Israelites. In the same way, this son, Amalek, his people end up becoming the Amalekites. And we're going to run into those several more times, that specific tribe. When they come out of Egypt and they go into the Sinai Peninsula, you're going to see they get attacked by Amalekites. Well, they're actually kind of like their cousins from like 400, almost 500 years earlier. Important to take note of all the little root words, like here, well, the Timnites or the Ishmaelites or whatever ite it is that you go through, you can trace. If you look at the root of that, whatever that ite is, you look at the root of it, you can trace it back to a name, and then you can trace that genealogy back, and you can see how they were related, on what generation that they come together amongst the house of Shem. Interestingly enough, eventually there's a king named Agag who is an Amalekite. Now this is way years and years and years forward when Saul is king over all of Israel. They're at war with the Amalekites. Well, the king of the Amalekites, his name is Agag. Okay, so you see that Amalek was a descendant of Esau. So we know Amalek was a descendant of Isaac, okay, because it was Abraham, then Isaac had Jacob and Esau. So we know that Amalek is a descendant of Isaac, so we know that they're related. Years and years and years later, under the rule of King Saul, the Amalekites are at war with the Israelites. So the descendants of Esau are at war with the descendants of Jacob. And there's a king named Agag who is the king of the Amalekites. He has descendants called Agagites. When we get to the book of Esther, you'll see that there's a man named Haman. And he wants to kill all the Jews. He wants to wipe them out. Well, Haman is an Agagite. He is a descendant of Agag, who Agag is a descendant of Amalek, and Amalek is a descendant of Esau, who was Jacob's brother. You can kind of trace all these names, and that's where it really gets interesting, because you see that they're all related. Just like we, all of us on earth, we're all related. We all descend from the three sons of Noah. So we are all related. We all descend from Noah. So as you go through your reading, pause every now and then, and I know there's a lot of ites and it's just easy to kind of like, oh yeah, and skip that part, but there's some really interesting information in there. So this week, remember we talked about horizontal books that move time forward, and then we talked about vertical books which interject into those horizontal books. The horizontal book that we're in right now is Genesis, okay? And we're in the patriarch era. So there's the patriarch era. We're in the book of Genesis. When we're going to finish up the book of Genesis this next week, and then we're going to read Job. And Job takes place during the time of Genesis, okay? So that's what was coming up this week. We're going to finish up with the patriarch era this week. So as we finish up the patriarch era and we read the book of Job and we move on into the Exodus this next week, it's important to remember this is when God made the covenant with Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant. Verses 13 through 16 says, Then the Lord said to Abram, You can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, where they will be oppressed and slaves for 400 years. I will punish the nation that enslaves them in the end, and they will come away with great wealth. As for you, you will die in peace, be buried at a ripe old age. Well, we already read about Abraham passing away. He died at a ripe old age. And in verse 16, after 4 generations, your descendants will return here to this land. For the sins of the Amorites do not yet warrant their destruction. So God is telling them way back here in Genesis 15 that they're going to, his descendants will go into a foreign land, which is Egypt. Spoiler alert. They're going to be there for 400 years. They're going to be as oppressed as slaves. And then he's going to punish the nation that enslaves them, Egypt, Pharaoh, let my people go. And in the end, they will come away with great wealth, which they do. And then after 4 generations, their descendants will return to this land, the land of Canaan. This is a foretelling of the book of Exodus. The events that we're going to read about after we finish up the book of Job, those are the things we're going to read about when we finally get to the Exodus era with Moses and all them coming out of Egypt. So here's the prophecy. Here's the foretelling. This is where God told them that already. We started out with all of creation. And now the Bible's narrowed its focus down to being about the line of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now his 12 sons. That's where we're going to stop moving forward in our timeline. Next week we're going to read Job. So we've seen that happen. It played out. It played out with the garden, played out with the flood, played out with Babel, and now we've gotten to Abraham. Now we've got to the 12 sons of Jacob. And that is that God can bring about the Redeemer, who is Jesus, who will come, and this is also a spoiler alert, who will come from the tribe of Judah. Okay, so remember there are all the sons. Our next week we're going to focus on Joseph right here and everything that Joseph does. But Jesus doesn't descend from the tribe of Joseph. Jesus descends from the tribe of Judah. The Bible's narrowed the focus all the way down to this point to make the sequence of events occur so that Judah can come about, so that eventually David can come about, Solomon can come about, and then Jesus can come about. Jesus will be the Redeemer that cancels that original sin that Adam committed way back in the Garden of Eden. So the first week we learned how when mankind makes decisions based on their own understanding and their own reasoning, how it can lead to destruction. But we also learned last week how God used those events and how He can turn those events around to bring about His purposes anyway. Would it have been easier if we just did it the way God told us to do in the first place? Absolutely. Does anything change because of that? No, it doesn't. It just makes it more difficult for the humans that are involved in that because they took it upon themselves to make decisions. In all of that, God knows that we're going to do that. This week, we've learned that God designs each person. He designed you, He designed me, He designed us with special DNA, with special characteristics. He put us through certain things in our lives to build us into the people that we are, so that we can accomplish whatever it is that He has for us to accomplish. And those two things work together because we're imperfect people. There's only been one person on this earth, and His name was Jesus Christ. So God uses our imperfection to bring about His purpose. So week 1, week 2, that is the summation of all that. This next week, we're going to be jumping into the story of Joseph. And we're going to learn about how those 12 tribes come into Egypt and why they're there enslaved for 400 years, so that when we pick back up with our horizontal book of Exodus, where we're actually moving along in time, when we pick back up with Exodus after we read Job, we'll understand why the Israelites, why the 12 tribes are in Egypt to begin with. It was all the way back over there in Genesis 15. God told Abraham it would happen. Alright, so have a good week and have a good time reading about Joseph.